More than 100 CEOs met on Zoom Saturday morning to talk about how to deal with the growing pressure over restrictive voting bills across the nation. This comes days after Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said businesses should stay out of politics before walking those comments back because, of course, he wants their money. He doesn't want their voices. Let's dig deeper and bring in the call's organizer, the one and only Jeffrey Sonnenfeld. He's a professor at the Yale School of Management. Jeffrey, let's just start here. CEOs, they do not look to weigh in on politics. They follow business. And their main priority is to make sure their customers happy and their employees are happy. And if they've got 1 and 2, then number 3, their shareholders will be very, very happy. So isn't this about business?
Stephanie, you just nailed it so well in framing it. You're right. There's a great pent-up resentment for any political leader to suggest, give us your money and shut up. This is a taxation without representation. So this was an act of defiance that they were gathering. They're across the political spectrum. The group was probably 65, 70% Republican, and they didn't all agree on what solutions they should follow. But they all were concerned about these voter restrictions, which most, if not all, saw as voter repression. But they also, you're exactly right, don't want politicians creating wedge issues. They don't want angry communities and finger-pointing workforces and hostile shareholders. That's the fabric of social society being torn apart is bad for business. It's bad for the personal values of many of these CEOs and the patriotism of a lot of them. But a lot of them just out of, as you pointed, self-interest. Social harmony is in the interest of free markets functioning effectively, and that means a functioning democracy.
Were you surprised? I mean, you were hoping you were going to get a couple dozen CEOs to participate in this. You had you had some people calling in from Augusta.
You know everything. You have a camera in here. That's exactly what happened. You have seen close up when we've done small forums. We even came to one of our caucuses in Washington several years ago. Is like we usually give them 6 months notice. To give them 48 hours notice, I thought, boy, inviting 120 of these really titanic superstars, these really top business leaders, we get maybe 10 or 12. And I'm wondering, how do I fill the grid of the 25 faces on the gallery of Hollywood squares that you have on these Zoom pages? We wind up with the 120 people, 90 of them, the actual CEO business leaders. And they were very candid and very anxious to address these issues, and a strong mutual reinforcement of those who boldly stepped out front in the past week that were being shot at. And the notion of suggesting boycotts, when you have the leaders of all the American airline industry from, American, Delta, and United there giving each other air cover. If somebody says boycott the companies, they better be awfully wealthy and have their own private jets. I don't know how they're going to get around.
Did more people who participated, did they come to listen and learn, or did they have something to say?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of them wanted to unravel some of the muddiness that was created intentionally about the Georgia legislation, for example. And we had legal expert Michael Waldman of the Brennan Center on Justice and the political historian Tim Snyder and others there to go through the details of this. And as has been reported, Ken Fraser and Ken Chenault and others to take a look at how it was 80% better than the original proposal, but still 20% quite bad, and how the Georgia CEOs figured that out only after it became public. They didn't know. It was written overnight, ratified by the lower and upper houses that morning, and signed midday by the governor, who surely could not have read the 100 pages himself, and no CEO, and there's no general public review of it. But then they looked at the spreading of these other 47 states, where it's even more pernicious. So a lot of it was educational, what's coming up. And we had a lot of documentation and a lot of discussion about what is factually in these other states. So there's some 330 initiatives in these other 47 states. Then there was open discussion about responses.
So was there a clear takeaway? To your point, you got over 40 more states about to embark on this.
Yeah, actually, according to the Brennan Center, it's 47. I thought it was 42 myself going into the event. And then they actually showed us what's unfurling. Some are more pernicious than others, depending on who's the governor that can veto this and have a veto that's not overridden. But still, the threats were in 47. And the takeaways are some of them are taking a look at things they could do on the state-by-state basis. I've just been between we close friends, since I always tell you everything, is Brad Karp, the chairman of Paul Weiss, one of the nation's premier law firms, has bonded together the nation's 60 largest law firms, trying to get all the 100 largest law firms together. But he already has SWAT teams ready now to go state by state, starting immediately if there are battles where they need election law expertise to fortify this. There are things like people who are major league owners of teams that talking about what they're learning from MLB, the Major League Baseball move. By the way, we learned in the national surveys was far more popular even among avid baseball fans than were imagined. So they're taking a look at what options does that give you. So there are many company-specific options. Some were taking then a look at state-by-state legislative issues, cutting off funding for the campaigns of legislators that fight for these restrictions, or putting on a moratorium, a hold on major financial ramp-ups into states that that would put their employees in a position of feeling they're not welcome or denied voice. And other opportunities like looking at paid time off. That they were so excited. This past November was not only the largest and most secure election, but the CEOs had a hand in that, because this is the first time we not only had millions of workers with paid time off to vote, whatever the hours are, however restricted, but also a little bit more than a million of these employers. Employees had time off to actually work in the polls to help fortify at-risk elderly workers at these polling places. So there are some of those kinds of solutions that people, as well as federal legislation, some favor H.R. 1, which is preemptive guidelines. Mm-hmm. Some favor H.R. 4, which is the John Lewis, as you know, Voting Rights Act of 65 reenacted, more reactive to catch misconduct. And some say there are execution problems with both of those
Jeffrey,
pieces.
let me jump in, because we just got breaking news that Will Smith and Apple have just pulled out of a movie they planned to produce in the state of Georgia. It was titled Emancipation, a slave thriller, obviously in response to what's happening there. Can I get your thoughts on the immediate trickle-down impact? And I'm thinking about the Georgia economy, all of those local Georgia businesses who are dependent on the movie business. Remember, it was a couple of years ago, Stacey Abrams urged the media, the entertainment industry, don't leave Georgia. Our economy needs you. We've heard the same thing from small businesses in Georgia over the last week when, just think about it, they lost 9,000 hotel rooms like that when the MLB decided to leave. So Will Smith, Apple, MLB, talk about how that impacts in the short term the Georgia's economy, local economies.
Good for you for clearing the air that Stacey Abrams and others fighting for voter access in Georgia are not calling for boycotts. They're not calling for moratoriums. They're not calling for any kinds of these disruptive moves. They're afraid of them happening. And this is because, as we heard from team owners, that they're listening to their workforces, the major league players, in this case, actors that don't want to go into a hostile state. So what's the takeaway from that? And thank you for sharing that breaking news. The takeaway from that, if you're mad about that, then go back to your legislators. The Georgia legislature is technically out of session right now. They could regroup tomorrow. They could go back into special session on the 4th of July. They right now have a special session, which is set for August, where they have a redistricting. They could revise it then. Or the Governor Kemp, this is I think one of the only states in the nation, maybe the only state, where he has until the 1st of July, months after he already signed it, to rescind his signature. That put public pressure on him to rescind his signature and fix the law. But if people are uncomfortable going there, then they're paying an economic price. But again, none of the voting rights advocates in Georgia have been lobbying in favor of these kinds of things. They're just afraid of such things. As you saw, some pretty harsh statements coming out of Microsoft, which was in the process of sending many employees in there too. And this is not isolated to entertainment or to sports. Across the board, there's some major financial institutions that are looking at putting on hold the movement of people into Georgia right now.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.